Welcome back to the Matter of Facts podcast on the Prepper Broadcasting Network. We talk prepping, guns, and politics every week on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Go check out our content at mwfpodcast.com on Facebook or Instagram. You can support us via Patreon or by checking out our affiliate partners. I'm your host, Phil Rabley, and my co-host, Andrew Bobo, is on the other side of the mic, and here's your show. Hey, welcome back to Matter of Facts podcast. Phil and Andrew back behind the mic, and we have a third amigo in the house to help drive some interesting conversation, hopefully. So I guess we'll start with the metaphorical elephant in the room. Who is this third amigo who's joined us that, quite frankly, a lot of people will probably recognize, if not by face, probably by voice?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm Tommy. I'm one of the courts members here. It's been a long-time member of a viewer of Matter of Facts podcast. I've been on here, I think, a couple other times. It's been a little while, but talked medical stuff before. Just a little bit about me. I am obviously a prepper. That's why I'm here with these guys. One of them that goes to prepper camp with all of the group every year. And my background is medical. I'm a paramedic. I'm primarily a flight paramedic. I've also worked ER for many years, so 25 plus years in EMS. So that's what I do for a living. My wife's medical too, so that's kind of what we are. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure, Tommy. And yeah, Tommy's kind of been like our silent partner. Anytime we get a medical question, like he's part of a group of people we reach out to. Like, what do you think? Because quite frankly, Tommy's probably forgotten more about medical care than I have learned at this point, and may ever learn, because that's your bread and butter day in, day out job. But I guess we'll start with the traditional, what have we all done to prep in the past week? I've spent my morning tearing apart the truck, getting it up in the air, checking fluid levels, and checking the front end to make sure I don't have anything developing play, and checking wheel bearings and brakes and rotating tires and everything. Like Tommy said, in 3 weeks, prepper camp is going to be here, and I'd really rather not have a problem on a 650-mile one-way road trip, if that could at all be avoided. So, call that prepping, but also consider the fact that that's one of the two vehicles we'd be taking to bug out if all hell broke loose down here. We had a major hurricane like we did last year. So keeping your vehicles in fighting shape and ready to go at a moment's notice is kind of a prep down here. Because I'd really love to be able to ride out any hurricane we find, but there's just sometimes that's just not a smart decision to make. So, which one of you two wants to go first? Y'all both look incredibly bored listening to me just ramble
on. No, I did nothing. Just working on the house. That's about it. Went up north to see the family, mom and dad, and saw Randy and Doris. If anybody who does not know who they are, they will be at prepper camp this year as well. I will not be at prepper camp. Just in case anybody who's listening does not know. And if you're going to prepper camp just to see me, then I'm sorry, you're going to be disappointed. But no, I am not going to prepper camp just because just vacation and some work stuff and just trying to save vacation. If I do it right next year, I'll carry over a week and I'll have 4 weeks of vacation, and then I can have more fun. So I'm just trying to be responsible and limit some stuff so I don't run out of my vacation in the first 2 months that I got it. So, but no, mostly, like I said, I went to my mom and dad's. My dad helped me work on my bench. I know that's been a long project, but it's getting closer. So I was working on the tabletop, got that. So I'm doing, I think it's 7/8 inch plywood, and I basically cut it down the middle, folded it in half, or folded it so now it's basically just a thick piece of plywood, and then I'm gonna put put the top on top of that so that it just kind of gives it a little bit more sturdiness, and then I'll do an edge around it so you don't see the plywood, of course. But nope, I got that. So I have this Wednesday, Thursday off, so I will be probably gluing up the top and then working on that Wednesday and Thursday, working on the rest of the wood and stuff. So trying to get the office set up and get that finished up so I can stop recording in my living room and record in the office that I'm building it for.
What about you, Tommy? I know that I know a bit about your living situation that I wouldn't like want to make super public, but I mean, I know that there's a bit that goes into it.
Yeah, with all the kids and stuff. But we actually this week was pretty busy week for me. Last weekend, my 18-year-old daughter, who just graduated high school, says, "Hey, Dad, can we go shooting this weekend?" I'm like, and she's the least interested in guns of all of them. My two boys are like, anytime I mention guns, they're out there shooting minimum of 500 rounds of 22 and whatever else I'll put in their hands. But I've kind of had to force her in the past to, hey, you're going to be familiar and all this. Well, now that she's 18 and getting out on her own and, working and stuff, she's starting to realize all this stuff that, me and her mom have always wanted her to be prepared and be ready and, be ready to take care of herself is like now she has to do it. So, yeah, she actually was like, hey, can you take me shooting? And I was like, yeah. So I took her and her boyfriend. He had never shot a handgun before. So I was like, come on, I'll teach you. So I took him out to the range and we had a great time and, shot a bunch of stuff. And we're actually buying her for her graduation present. We're buying her own pistol. So she's trying a bunch of different things out, so I think holding a bunch, we're going to go with probably a SIG 365 XL. She's like all about the red dot after trying both. So that's what she wants. So that's probably what we're going to be getting her soon. And so that was the main thing. And then I spent part of the week out of town in Atlanta going, doing some education for the helicopter job. They have, monthly training they do. And I went down there to help teach that, which again is, you're away from home and it's only, 120 miles from the house, but they require me to take a rental car. So I have to unload, and I always take my get home bag, throw it in the back. I always have usually my AR pistol. So my trick for that is it's like, how do you take that and transport it and keep it in a hotel? So the trick I've done now, it's got the law folding adapter on it and stuff. So I have a tennis racket bag and I fold up the AR, put it in the tennis racket bag, have a couple spare mags in the side pouch, and I walk into the hotel with a tennis racket bag and a backpack and nobody looks, even thinks anything about it. And that's kind of my way of transporting, having, a AR pistol with me at all times. So that's worked really, really well for me. So I did that. And then I guess prepping wise, that's about it.
Well, I mean, there's definitely lessons to be learned there about bringing our kids along into this kind of lifestyle at a pace they're willing to cooperate with. Because, like, it's one of I deal with this with my 10-year-old all the time, where it's always a function of like I really want her to learn these lessons because one day it might be the difference between a bad day and a really bad day. But then there's times where it's like I just don't know if like there's a point where you push too hard, you lose them.
Yep.
You have to just kind of like I imagine a lot like you did, just kind of like leave it as an open invitation of when you decide you're ready, let me know and I'll make it happen.
Yeah, that definitely seems to have worked with her. And she's always had, we made her a small get home bag because she's never very far from home. But when she started driving, it's like, hey, this is the stuff that's in your Jeep. And they've always known the plan of, it's not that far from school. It's definitely within walking distance. It's 8 or 10 miles at the most. Nothing they couldn't do to walk home in a day if they needed to. But so we've always kind of tried to do that. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on the podcast or not before. One thing we did for them for prepping is we have put first aid stuff in their backpacks. So before, it was right after Parkland, my wife was like, hey, what what can we do? And I said, well, we can't change the school's policy. We can't be there to protect them. I said, all we can do is train them in stop the bleed and give them the equipment. So very quietly, I was like, don't tell anybody about this. They all carried Israeli bandages and a cat tourniquet with them and have since Parkland. And that's, the kind of the only thing we could do to help them with that. So they've always understood a little bit about taking care of themselves, but you're exactly right. It's that they got to have a little self-realization and kind of get there on their own too, and be willing to learn. So I think all of us are definitely trying our best to get them there. So that's a good thing.
Well, and then the whole idea of a get home bag is, to get home, but it's to make life easier to get home and give you the supplies and the means to get home versus having nothing or having a backpack with just regular, normal, like weird, I don't know, just odd stuff in it or whatever you want to carry, books or something. But you have a get home bag is just yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna beat a dead horse by saying it again. So it's designed to do that. And even though she doesn't live that far away from the school and stuff like that, like she can walk, like you said, your kids can walk home. If you gave them the tools to make that walk home a lot easier.
Yeah, and it's small. I can't remember everything we put, but definitely first aid stuff to start fire, small water filter, some kind of rations of, you know what I mean? Like you don't really have to have that, but like you said, it's to make it easier, and it kind of makes you feel better to feel like you've got the stuff. And there is times she's farther away now that she's out of high school, but she's not really, real far out yet, but it's going to happen. I mean, she does go places. So,
and then when she goes to college and stuff like that.
Yep.
And if she goes, whether it's a community college or she decides to go to a university somewhere or she goes out of state, you almost remind me, Tommy, of I could see you doing the Locker 9 from Franklin Horton. I could see you doing all of that for your kids.
It just crossed my mind.
Yeah, I could see you doing that.
Yeah, it's again, but the thing is, it's more than just giving them cat tourniquets and Israeli bandages. It's giving them the tools in the toolbox, metaphorically, psychologically speaking. It's the idea that you even have put it in their heads that you need to have these things, because sitting around waiting for EMS to show up in the middle of an active shooter situation is a really bad idea. You need to be able to deal with immediate aid. You need to be able to deal with self-aid and buddy aid immediately in the moment, because the average person has never been instructed about how time-sensitive that situation is. And their natural inclination is just sit there and wait for the professionals to show up. And we know, Tommy, you know how fast exsanguination happens. It's not like you have a half hour, depending on what the nature of the injury is. You may not have 5 minutes.
Nope.
You need to deal with the problem right now. And that's a lot of the reason why when I first started making the medical kits for my wife's Jeep, and it's got 95% of the same stuff mine does in it, but I explained to her, I'm like, there is no Tylenol in this kit. There are no Band-Aids. This is all for stuff that's going to kill you in 5 minutes, because that is the only thing I'm concerned about in this scenario. Because if it's not going to kill you in 5 minutes, you can wait until you get to the hospital or until an ambulance shows up if it's a car accident or something like that. This is for immediate life-threatening situations. And while I would love to say we live in a world where that doesn't happen, I've said it before, I have beaten EMS to the scene of an accident 4 times in the last 10 years, where there was no fire truck, there was no police officer, there was no ambulance on site when I pulled up. Twice I watched the accident happen. Now, you could say I have a 44-mile commute, so I have a lot of opportunity for that sort of thing to happen, but it's still the point of, thank God nobody was seriously hurt, but if somebody had been hurt, I have things in my vehicle to keep them buttoned up long enough for the professionals to show up. Well, and I've never heard an EMT or a paramedic be upset about the application of a tourniquet that saved a patient's life.
Well, I always go off of you're your own first responder, and the whole idea. Tommy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I read an article with like the school shootings and active shooter situations, stuff like that. And they found that a lot of people, because the way things used to be, and they're starting to change more, is police had to clear the scene. Police always had to clear the scene, say it was safe, make sure nothing else was going on, and then medical personnel could enter the scene. It's starting to change a little bit. I've been seeing some articles and some trainings and stuff like that on fire departments now, and actually the paramedics and stuff going in with the police and being kind of like a triage in a way. Um, but I was reading an article that was basically saying that a lot of casualties from the gunshot wounds caused the injury, yes, but the death was, and some of these were preventable deaths, but because they had to wait till the scene was clear and they couldn't get the medical personnel in there, a lot of people had bled out, or died of shock and everything because of they couldn't get the proper help. And so that's starting to change. You're starting to see trainings. I'm starting to see things with, like I said, fire personnel going in with the cops and with, and I'm seeing more and more EMS here in Michigan wearing protective vests.
And that's definitely the training. You're totally right. That's the new standard. That's what we've been training for years. Most of us there's 2 classes offered. There's TCCC, which is the military version, and then TECC, which is the civilian version. It's basically the same class. TCCC definitely focuses more on, they talk about it in TECC, but, they focus more on, hey, number 1 rule is return fire, kind of thing, because all those guys have guns. And TECC is a combination. Like when I took the class, it was a combination of firefighters, EMS personnel, and police officers. And so we did talk about that, and it's been the standard for years, like you said, that we should be going in. The Pulse nightclub shooting was one of the biggest ones where people laid there and bled out and died that could have survived. Parkland, that happened. A lot of all the school shootings, that's happened. So that's been the standard. But what did we just see a couple months ago in Uvalde? Mm-hmm. Nobody went in, much less the police. Not EMS. Nobody went in. So although it's what we're supposed to do, we're not there yet. Right. So I think y'all are correct. You got to be prepared to be your own first responder until then, because you may be somewhere where they're up to doing it right, or you may not.
So. Well, that, and then you also, the fact that you're training your kids and you have them trained with medical response to where if there is an active shooter of some kind in their school or whatever, or there's an incident of any kind, it doesn't even have to be an active shooter. It could be someone slipped and fell and they, the pencil scraped up their arm and did some major damage. I don't know. Or someone tripped and fell and put their hand through some glass. Mm-hmm. It could be something like that. And you trained your kids to where, hey, they can react right then and there and save a life. Last year when I was living at my old place, I think I talked about this on the show. I got a phone call from my roommate saying that there was a gunshot victim down the road, 3 houses down. Went down there. It was just an older brother accidentally mistook his younger brother for a deer and shot him. And I applied I was the first one on scene, and I was applying a tourniquet as fire rolled up to his leg. So like that stuff right there, like you need to be trained in it and carry that stuff. I have my full medical kit that I carry in my Jeep all the time, has oxygen, has everything I need to, I just don't have a litter basically is all I don't have. And then I have on the headrest, it's a blowout kit with 2 cat tourniquets, and then my everyday carry when I'm at work and stuff. And normally if I'm wearing pants and shoes and stuff, it's on me, but I have an ankle kit that has trauma shears, has a chest seal, bandages, cat tourniquet, like everything I need to stop some massive bleeding. Like that's on my ankle every day, all day long. When we have full kits in our vehicles, but I might be walking a building or doing something and not be next to the medical kit and something might happen. Like, so.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. Definitely, I think teaching your family and kids to do that stuff. It's super simple. So you can get online and watch videos, stop the bleed. There's plenty of online training. It's really not that hard to do. So I think it's really good we all have that mindset. And if we get more people, to realize they're going to have to take care of themselves.
Yeah, and get away from like the catastrophic scenarios. I mean, Andrew brought up somebody just sticking their hand through a piece of plate glass. I mean, you sever that major artery in your arm, you have a big problem to deal with very quickly. But I always go back to like natural disasters. Like I was very frank with my wife and daughter after Hurricane Ida that going to the emergency room right now is going to be a big freaking problem. Cat 4 hurricane just hit South Louisiana. Every emergency room in the southern half of this state is full of people. The medical staff is probably stretched to the limit, bearing in mind most of them may not even be there yet. They might be dealing with their own problems at home or buried under trees like we were. And I just told them, I'm like, guys, y'all need to wear work gloves. You need to wear closed-toed shoes, long pants. We cannot have minor injuries, cuts, scrapes, bruises.
Closed-toed shoes, long.
Because like any little injury in this situation could turn into a very serious problem very quickly. I mean, I'm sure we'll probably get into it here in just a minute, Tommy, talking about where you've been, but like outside of the first world, skin infections and blood infections kill people all the stinking time. And it's usually something really simple where like antibiotics or even a little bit of rubbing alcohol would have fixed the problem. But if you're in an area where medical care is not to be had, or if you're in a situation like this where medical care is not easy to come by, you either deal with the problem yourself or it doesn't get dealt with. And small problems snowball very quickly.
You're correct. And I'm glad you mentioned again about the injuries in school. Georgia put Stop the Bleed kits in all of our schools. I think we issued like 5 kits per school. I did part of the training for our area several years ago. Well, the first one of the tourniquets from there, but the first 2 tourniquets that were used for the schools from those kits, the first one was a kid, a 16-year-old in pottery class. What do 16-year-old boys do? They break stuff. He's piddling around, breaks a piece of pottery. He severs his ulnar artery in his wrist, not the radial on the other side, but still very severe bleeding. A school resource officer placed a tourniquet and saved his life. I actually took care of that guy in my ER, and we trauma surgeon sewed his artery back together, or just sewed it off, and we saved him. And then the second kid was a small elementary school child outside on some piece of equipment, fell, broke her arm, had an open fracture that got the artery, and again, I don't know who, but the school used the Stop the Bleed kit and put a tourniquet on and saved this girl's life. So we were like, man, it's already been used twice, and it wasn't an active shooter situation. It was the normal stuff y'all are talking about, and that's what saved lives, was having that stuff there.
See, I'm not sure if Business Matter of Facts happens to be watching this right now, but I'm trying to figure out a way to gently insert myself into her workplace and basically say, guys, there's some things, some very simple things y'all probably ought to think about for this environment. And I would love to be a participant in any way humanly possible. I will teach it. I will fund it. I will take money out of my own pocket to try to make this happen for y'all. If y'all will just give me 5 minutes and let me explain to you why this is a good idea. Because, my wife and my daughter are both there every day. And I have a above and beyond the fact that I just don't really like the idea of innocent people, meeting bad ends. I have a very particular special interest in making sure that things are put in place to make sure that people can help themselves in that environment. So if she's watching, I'm sure we're going to have a conversation this evening.
That's right.
And if she's not, we're going to have a conversation anyway. But Tommy, talk the listeners through, because the short background behind how this happened was you went silent in our little signal chat. And that's, people flex in and flex out. It's not a big deal. But I was literally trying to contact you to ask you a question. And it had been like 3 or 4 days I hadn't been able to get a hold of you. And I was like, this is unusual that Tommy is this quiet for this long. So before I contacted your wife to make sure you were okay, I texted you and found out you weren't where I thought you were.
Yep. And honestly, I call it a prepping fail on my part. I knew I was going somewhere where I would not have cell service. I was going to the Dominican Republic, and the group I was going with actually said, hey, plan on using Facebook Messenger, the WhatsApp, or Signal for communication with your friends and family, because we knew we would have places that were Wi-Fi. They said it might not be great, but they said those signaling or messaging apps will definitely work. So I was like, cool. I planned on using Signal. Well, I got a replacement phone, like, I think my back screen had cracked and it was having some problems. So Apple sent me a new phone. The day before I left, I got this new phone, rebooted it, took it with me. Didn't know with the new phone, I had to verify the Signal. It had to send me a text message to verify to reboot it. So I get to the DR, open up Signal. Hey, we need to send you a text. Did you get it? Well, no, I didn't. So Signal did not work for me. Luckily, iMessages worked and FaceTime worked. I had good enough internet, and then the Facebook Messenger worked. So I had plenty of contact with my wife. But you're right, I failed on that aspect to prepare that app. So, like I said, all of a sudden I was gone. And yeah, when you text me, I was like, "Oh, sorry, dude. Yep, I'm in the DR." So what I was doing there is I was down on a medical mission trip, and it's kind of interesting how it got started. Is my dad called me one day. He goes, "Hey, my church," he goes to a church in South Georgia. He goes, "They're going on a medical mission trip. They really need medical people." I was like, "Okay." He said, "Well, why don't you and Kristen go?" And I was like, we'll think about it. We'll see. He gave me some dates. I was like, "Well, we'll see what we can do." And then my dad gave me that. Yeah, I'm going, man. I'd really like you to go with me. Like it hit me in the heart. Like, hey, this could be the last thing. You know what I mean? You just never know what time you got with people. And my dad's not that old. He's 67, but it just was one of those things. I was like, he wants me to go with him, and I immediately said, I will make this happen. No matter what, I will go. I will commit. So, several months out, and I said, I'll go. Well, fast forward a few months, he had a hip replacement, and it'd been a couple months, and they're like, "Oh no, you can't go." His doctor wouldn't let him go. So there I am. I'm like, what? So I'm going with a bunch of strangers, end up 30 people I didn't know, all from Middle and South Georgia. I'm like, whatever. I don't care. Had a great time, but we were going down there to do a medical mission trip. The guy that led the trip, him and his wife, they actually have a ministries, and they've been going to the Dominican for 23 years, and they lived down there for I think 3 to 5 years. I immediately liked these people. When we were in the airport and talking about being prepared for something, and it got brought up about having cash, and I was like, I have cash. And he goes, "Oh, I have plenty of cash." And I was like, yeah, I don't understand why people don't have a little cash ready. And he goes, "Oh no." So we figured out real quick that they were preparedness minded, and we had lots of good conversations along the week. They were both very preparedness minded people, and in all ways, kind of like all of us are. And he's a retired DNR agent. She's a nurse, and they live in Middle Georgia, and they lived down there for a long time. So they know, how it is to live in the third world country. Well, so we got down there, had a good group of people. We were going out to the bates of the sugarcane fields, which is the poorest area of the Dominican Republic, the hottest, the flattest area. So going out there, like all of us are, I feel naked enough that I can't take a gun. I had a carry-on bag, so okay, I can take a knife. So I was first thinking, what can I take with me to be prepared? And when I fly, I always try to think, what can I take with me in my carry-on? And you can always take, you can take a flashlight, you can take food, you can take a water filter. So stuff like that, I try to have with me at all times. But then now I'm going to a third world country, and I don't know what to expect. We ended up staying at a really nice resort on the ocean. So that was good. They had clean water and all this. But when we went out in the bates, we literally had to take everything with us we wanted. Every drop of water, every scrap of food. There was nothing. And we were an hour and a half away from where we were staying. So it was a really interesting situation. So some things I was going to mention is the prepping for that. So some things I took. One of the main things that I took, and I knew the whole time, was you can't drink the water there. Americans will get sick. You're not good. And to prepare for that, I took prescriptions of those medications that if I did drink the water and got sick, so I had the proper antibiotics. I also had antibiotics for skin infections. So that was some of my preps. So I had, medications for diarrhea, nausea. If I got Montezuma's Revenge, the 2 antibiotics I needed for that. And I did take antibiotics for skin stuff because, again, you really are on your own there. And, little did I know, we had lots of that stuff that we were giving away. And so if we'd have needed it, we would have been taken care of. But I didn't know that. So I wanted to be prepared. So I took my own medications, my own pharmacy for that. And the biggest thing I stuck in the bottom of my backpack was my Cat9 Hiker water filter. And I'm like, I'm going to have clean water, something that doesn't kill me, if nothing else. I took some food. I took a few things in my carry-on, and in my checked luggage, I had, a 10-pack of tortillas, a bunch of packs of tuna, and a big thing of peanuts. I'm like, if nothing else, I'll have some protein and some, some food no matter what. Like I said, the food there was very good. That was not an issue, but I was prepared for that. The water was a big thing, and I didn't ever need the water filter. We would buy water. We would buy 5-gallon jugs, kind of like you put in the water coolers, and that's how they would buy their water. And when we had to take water with us, we were taking 30-plus gallons of water every day, and we were drinking almost all of it because it was 90-something degrees, super humid, down there. And so we were all drinking. I was drinking a gallon, 1 to 2 gallons of water and Gatorade a day just to stay hydrated. So that was definitely something to think about. But the water situation luckily worked out, but I was prepared for that. Like I said, always carried a flashlight, pocket knife, lighter. That's another thing that you can carry on an airplane, is a lighter. So that's kind of the things I did to start.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's worth pointing out though is that it ended up not being necessary, but you've been around the block long enough to know that, X amount of time passes without clean water. X amount of you like most people don't understand, especially for those that are my size. I can make it quite a long ways without a meal. I'm going to be grouchy, but I have a little bit of a prepper belly like most of us do, and I could get by for a little bit, missing a couple of meals. But without clean water that's not going to send you running to the nearest toilet, you're just not going to make it that far. And I mean, what you're talking about is literally the same situation as like when we do storm relief down here. It's you have to assume that the area you're going into has nothing. So you pack in your own fuel, you pack in your own cooking utensils, you pack in your own water, and go down the list. Anything you think you're going to need to be self-sufficient, because you just can't depend on being able to find it anywhere. Like, that's what I know a lot of organizations ran into when they were trying to go further south than where I live, down towards the coast after Ida. They were bringing in trailers full of stuff to give away to local residents to try to keep them settled. But then they had the entire truck bed packed with stuff for them because they were coming into an area with nothing. I mean, you couldn't even get roofing nails because the local hardware store is a bare slab. So, I mean, there's parallels there, I guess is what I'm saying.
There definitely is. I can see that. We were the same way. Everywhere we went, we took our own food, and it was for us. Very interesting environment. It's a very poor area, and some of these people, we went to some different bateys. A batey is basically a village in a sugarcane farm. They just kind of over time developed, like people that were working the fields kind of just built little shacks. They say the government owns the land, and they just kind of let them live there. They all have houses. The houses varied greatly, from huts made of pieces of wood and tin to block houses that were pretty dang nice, depending on what they did and how much they've built up or whatever. And So it was varied. It was interesting to see their culture. Everything's here, there's everybody has different cultures too, but it was interesting to see, like, when you walk around the place, it is trash everywhere. There's a common canal creek that runs through every batey. That's where they eat, drink, get their drinking water, everything. For the most part, that's where they get all their water. The animals are in the water, so that's not clean at all. But some of the bateys that had groups in there servicing them, like we went to one and we were like, hey, these people aren't quite as sick. Well, then we found out, there's a group called Children of the Nations that's been in there, and they'd had recent medical care within the last few months. Well, we went to another one where they had not had medical care in 2 to 3 years.
Oh, Jesus.
Because of COVID, and we had hundreds of people lined up, and we turned a whole lot of people away at the end of the day, and it was tough. But these people, chronically malnourished, all the kids had worms and malnourished, and stuff like that. Like you said, skin infections. We saw infections that had been there for some of them for days, months, and years. I treated a whole lot of burns. They drive a bunch of little crappy motorcycles around, and there was a whole lot of burns on legs from motorcycle tailpipes. I mean, I treated one 20-something-year-old who had been there for 2 months. He'd had a wound that is not healed because he'd had no care in 2 months. And he's lucky it wasn't infected and he hadn't died. But, we did the best we could to clean it up, and I debrided it, and we gave him some medicine for it and antibiotics, and little kids with small burns from them, so it was kind of interesting to see that kind of stuff. But some of these people, there's no telling how many people did die from those things before we even got there. And the Dominican has some really, really rich areas. The city, San Domingo we flew in, was a huge city. Apparently, like Punta Cana and the tourist areas, lots of money, but not where we were, and we were 30 miles from Haiti. You could see the mountain range. They were like, hey, on the other side of that is living hell on earth. They said it's terrible in Haiti. It's interesting that the Dominicans, for the most part, I say, the poor areas weren't as bad, but the cities, they hate Haitians. There's a big difference in their religion and their language and all this. So big racial divide there. Every day we were going through military checkpoints, and, as y'all would be, I'm staring out the window. Hey, what are these guys carrying? And it was pretty neat. Their military bases we went by, like, all their buildings were built of Connex boxes, but everything that had to do with the military, they had, like, painted in this camo. It was kind of cool. And so every military checkpoint, they were either carrying Mossberg 500s or old M16A1s with the magazines that were so worn they were brass colored, And I will say all of them had good trigger discipline. You know what I mean? There was I looked real close at that stuff, and they would see us. One time they got on the bus and looked, and they're like, hey, waved at us, smiled, and let us go through. And after that, we were pretty good. We never really got stopped again. And I asked the guys, like, what are they checking for? And he's like, Haitians. That's the only thing those checkpoints were for. They weren't for drugs. They weren't for guns. They were just looking for illegal immigrants, that were trying to sneak in, because they can't support any more people than they have, really. Like us, it's kind of like, at what point, we're helping all we can. Like, we can't, support everybody over there just because they're having a hard time. So that was kind of interesting, seeing their military and police presence. And, like I said, they had checkpoints pretty often, but we didn't have any problems with that. When we go out to these places, we gave a lot of care. We ended up, finally got the final numbers. We saw over 800 people in 5 days. And
holy smokes.
Yeah, it was a lot of people, a lot of kids, mostly women and children. There was some males, but most of them were out working at sugarcane farms. We saw some. It was really good. I felt more blessed than they probably were, that I got to be a part of this, and I definitely want to go back and help more. But it's definitely an uneasy feeling being out there and not having our stuff. And I talked to John, the guy that ran this mission thing. So when he lived out there, he talked about the police would come by, and he's ex-law enforcement. Some of them found out, so they'd come by and stop by their camp and see him. And he said at one point he knew somebody his worked for Surefire and gave him a box of either demo or scratch and dent or something. He said he had a box of Surefire flashlights, like really nice lights. And he said one of the guys they stopped by one night on a motorcycle, two of them on this little motorcycle. And he said, y'all not have flashlights? Because it was night. They were like, no, we're not issued flashlights. These guys have the night shift and they have no flashlight, period. Don't have one. And he goes, hey, here you go. He said, so he'd make a baggie up and give them a Surefire and a handful of batteries. And before you know it, every single local cop's coming by to visit. Hey, buddy, how you doing? So he said, I gave them away until there were no more. And he said, but those guys, took care of him. And he talked about how things work down there. And he said, there was one day some dude came by that looked like almost like a military general with all the insignia that was on his uniform, and he was I think like some kind of colonel or something for the local police force. And he's like, hey, I just want to tell you that I want to thank you for helping my guys out. And he said they would come by. He said this one guy came by and he's like, hey, you used to be a cop, right? And he goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, I was law enforcement. He goes, can you help me with my gun? It won't work. And he was afraid to take it in because he was afraid he'd get in trouble. And he said it was an old Smith & Wesson, like one of the 5900 series or something. And he said he got the thing, and he said the guy said he'd pull the trigger and nothing would happen. Well, he said it was just nasty, just full of junk, rusted, just nasty, nasty, nasty. So he said he took it apart. They cleaned it really, really well. And he said it seemed like it was going to work, but they can't shoot it there. So he's like, he cleaned it and he taught the guy to clean it. And he told him, hey, go take it. And when you get back, go shoot it. And apparently he took it and he shot it and the thing worked again. But apparently it wouldn't even fire one shot. It was so dirty and jammed up, but they not trained them to do any of that. But he talked about how, little things like that he did, and the police would do anything for him. And he was actually in a different area, and he was kind of getting shaken down by, some dirty cops, just stopping wanting money. And he just made one phone call to his buddy and it was free because of his relationships over some Surefire flashlights and fixing up, cleaning a couple pistols. So I thought that was an interesting perspective on how his, past life helped him over there.
Yeah, it's just like everything you're describing, I'm sure is just culture shock to anybody that's never been out of the comfortable womb of the United States of America. Like it's like when I came back from Iraq and tried to explain to people what I saw in Iraq. And I'm like, you don't understand. I can stand at the edge of this military base and look around me, and 50 yards on the other side of the fence are farms. And this is not something we built. This is an old Iraqi air base that was here before we got here. And the runway takes off directly over these people's houses. These were supersonic jet fighters. They're loud. And these people live in mud huts with satellite dishes on the roof. Like, I don't know how to properly communicate to y'all how many things I saw that to my ethnocentric white-ass American eyes were like really odd, but that's just another culture. It's another set of values, and it's this weird mismatch of things that don't seem like they go together. You know what I'm saying? Like you said, go from the richest area in Dominican Republic to the poorest area, and it's like this might as well be Mars. Like, how does this place and this place coexist in the same country? But that's economic stratification 101. I mean, we get that in the U.S. Pick a state, go to the center of the capital, and then go to the most backwater, tiny little pig's knuckle town in that state, and you're going to see the same kind of economic stratification, just maybe not the same extremes.
Yep, definitely. And I thought it was very interesting too. One of the things that really struck me, I got to do some unique things that most people in my group didn't do, is I got to go out into some of these people's houses. Because I was their wound guy, and all this. A couple of the days we had a Dominican doctor with us, and he wanted to go. This guy showed up in the clinic in a wheelchair, and he's like, he comes and gets me. He's like, hey, we need to go to this guy's house and look at his wounds. And I'm like, okay. And I'd been told, you don't leave the area where we're at. No wandering off. You know what I mean? Like, this is bad. They were like, and they told me, they're like, you'll probably be fine. Some of these women will not be fine.
Yeah.
But so I go find John. I'm like, hey, and he goes, and he goes and talks to the doctor. He goes, yeah, he's not far. If you're good with it, I'm like, hey, I'm good with whatever y'all need me to do. So me and this doctor and a couple of people, we wandered off and went to this guy's house. He had been robbed 5 years ago. It was a gunshot wound and had a spinal cord injury. And he has pressure ulcers and sores he's had for 5 years. And this doctor took care of him in the hospital 5 years ago. He's like, I really want to look at his wounds and redress them. So I loaded up the backpack and we walked to this guy's house. And for where he's at, they looked really well. But, you know, to have pressure ulcers and wounds 5 years later is just unheard of here for the most part. But it's the way it was. But what I found was very interesting is I got to go on a different bate. Went to somebody's house. We did a house call. Outside, there's trash everywhere. They're all bathing in this central canal that's nasty where the pigs and chickens are in too, you know, and you're like, okay, you go in these people's houses, spotless. Every house I went in, they may not have anything. Some of them were huts. Some of them were, you know, brick houses. They were all spotless. That was their culture, even though they didn't have anything. Their concrete or their dirt floors were as clean as you could get them. So I thought that was really interesting how their, like you said, the cultural stuff was. And that kind of I've always been like, doesn't matter if you're poor, doesn't mean you can't be clean. And they were very clean people. I thought it was interesting. They all had really nice clothes. They're all from the U.S. They all had English on them. I don't think they knew what they said. But apparently a lot of people donate clothes. So they all had decent clothes, but they just didn't have, you know, medical care and food. They all eat rice and beans. We saw where a lot of them were getting donations and they would go bring a bowl. And some of the rice had, I saw boxes that rice with soy, mixed with soy too for extra protein. But rice and beans and sugar cane's kind of the staple of their diet, which is, you know, not very nutritious.
No.
That's why they every now and then they have some chicken, but just very interesting. So one of the houses we went in, one of the things I wanted to really talk about was I thought it caught my attention and I snapped a picture. I'll have to put it in the group because I was like, oh, this is cool. And it was in this kitchen. They had a 5-gallon bucket, and in the bottom of it had a little hose running out, and it was a Sawyer, not the mini, but the Sawyer squeeze filter. And then a hose running off of that. And that's how their whole house, the only way they had purified water. And when I showed some of the guys there, they were like, yeah, some group has came in and gave that to them. But they had set up in a 5-gallon bucket where they could at least have purified water by one of the little Sawyer filters. I thought that was really cool to see.
Boy, Berkey could friggin' make themselves some really nice marketing if they would go into an area like that and drop off, like, if not even one for every household, just one for every village, for goodness sakes.
Yep.
I mean, one big community water point.
Yep.
I mean, that's
huge.
And like chasing that rabbit down the hole just a little bit, I almost think to myself, I'm like, you know, it'd be really great is if somebody came in and taught these people like primitive water filtration, like how to build their own sediment filter. You know what I'm saying? Because like
right.
that becomes the problem with Sawyers and Catadines and Berkeys and everything else at a certain point in an environment like this where you can't get resupplies super often. So once the filters reach a certain point, they either don't work or the flow rate's so restricted they may as well not work. And if you can't just go to your local store or Amazon them, you know, prime delivery in a day or two, you can't sustain that. You can't sustain that filtration system. But if you teach a person, hey, if you have gravel and sand and so on and so forth, like you can build a pretty reasonable sediment filter and all you need is a couple of buckets and a spigot at the bottom of it. And then after X amount of time passes, you just dump all the junk out, put in new junk. I mean, it sounds simplistic and primitive, but it's a lot better than drinking stuff out of the canal.
Yep. And I guess, you know, the germs don't bother them quite as much as us. Of course, they're used to it, but they still do have parasites and all these, you know, problems from the unclean water, which would be huge if they had clean. And there is some ministries down there that try to do that stuff. I've got a buddy who's a pilot that's what they did. And we saw they would try to do wells and do filters. But one of the villages by the church, we saw one of their ministries that they had put in a well that had filtered water. But I know most of them weren't getting it from there. But that is something, you're right, that would be huge, even basic stuff like that. But,
yeah, I mean that's almost a situation where primitive survival skills probably pay off better than otherwise, just because it's something they can sustain. I mean, that's the whole idea behind like special operations, special forces, Green Berets in the U.S. military, is that they go and train with indigenous forces and they teach them things they can actually use. Like, it makes no sense to teach a person in the third world how to use nods and, a friggin' D-ball. Makes no difference. They're not going to have the equipment. They can't maintain it. They can't supply it. It's useless. The knowledge of how to use it's useless to them. But if you teach them something they can actually implement at their technology and equipment and monetary level, that's useful. And I guess that's that. Like, when you sit here and talk about like somebody repurposing a very small, I think, Sawyer filter to do something like that, I'm like, wow. Imagine what a game changer would be if somebody taught these people how to build their own sediment filters. Or, I mean, just somebody just came in and tried. I mean, I don't know how feasible it is to dig wells in that area, though, because what you're describing, being fairly low elevation, very flat, that sounds a lot like where I'm from. And, yeah, the water table might only be 8 to 12 feet down in some places. I mean, hell, around here you could dig a hole with a shovel and find the water table. But you got to get down a fair bit farther to get clean, truly clean water. But even just catch rainfall into a cistern.
That's true, and I didn't see much of that. All of the houses in the cities or any of the areas that were more populated, the Bates, most of them didn't have this. But there were some. A couple of churches we were at had these systems where if they do have a water system at all to catch rain or anything, what's interesting is they have pumps, and all those houses and all the buildings in the big cities have these huge water tanks on top of the building. Mm-hmm. What they do, if the water's working, if the power's working, they pump water to the top, and then that thing stays full, so they have gravity fed pressure and water for when the power isn't working. And when the water isn't working, because they said that was very common too, that they were like, don't expect the electricity to last all day. It's one of those, like, it might be there, it might not, don't count on it kind of thing. And so it's pretty interesting.
Tommy, really quick, what were the qualifications for going over there? Like, what did you have to, the background you had to have, did you have to have a certain license and all that stuff?
No, not really. It was kind of one of those through the church, and there ended up being like 3 churches. They kind of gathered people, and they did vet the people based on trying to find the best fit for the group. So had you been on a mission trip before? Do you have medical training? What's your skills? That kind of stuff. So we had some nurses, and we had 2 doctors and 2 nurse practitioners that went with us, and some nurses. And then we've had people, but there was a lot of people there that had just been on mission trips and helped. They would help staff the pharmacy. And like one of the guys that's there, he's a firefighter and he's a first responder, and he didn't even really do medical care. But what he was there for is he's a big dude and he manned the door. You know what I mean? He'd been down there a whole bunch of times, and he was kind of, I joked with him. I'm like, he's the bouncer / security,
crowd control,
doorman kind of thing, because, that was important too. And because people needed stuff. So it was kind of interesting. And you probably saw this kind of stuff in Iraq, Phil, that they were like, hey, don't hand out anything to these kids or to the people on the streets. They're like, if you give a kid a piece of candy or a sandwich you don't think you want to eat, they will get mobbed, and you will start a fight for that kind of stuff, which was really sad, because we'd be sitting in there eating lunch, and these little kids are looking through the bars in the window. Everywhere in that country has bars on the windows, and they're just staring at you, pointing, begging for food. And it was like, you didn't even want to eat, because you're like, but you can't give them anything. They said they would get mobbed, and you would start a fight by giving them anything. So I thought that was interesting.
In our case, the reasoning was a little bit more concerned about somebody dropping a hand grenade on you.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Maybe not as big a concern where y'all were, but yeah, I mean, it's just, and again, that's, I hate to call that like a cultural thing because I'm not trying to infer that that's like the culture of the Dominican Republic, but like that's part of like your situational awareness in that area you're in. Is
Yeah.
there are these certain things that even though you're well intending have deleterious effects downstream, so you don't need to do them because somebody's going to get the crap kicked out of them for the sandwich you just gave them.
Yep. And it's, they have the macho machismo society. So it's one of those, they kind of laughed at me because, like, in the clinic, banding my station, I'm all smiles, be nice, take care of people. And as soon as we walk out, I'm flipping the switch and I'm on, like, head on a swivel, acting like I'll be the badass, whatever I need to do. They're kind of laughing. But the guys were there like, no, that's what you have to do because they will test you. You know what I mean? They're always looking for the weakest link. And, so this is something I didn't even tell the people in my group, but one of the girls that was in the group that's a nurse ended up being the person sent to me on the airplanes. We kind of became travel buddies, and she's a 23-year-old nurse from Statesboro. Great girl, super nice, but she's a 23-year-old girl who just kind of happy-go-lucky. So there was several of us kind of watching out for her. Well, on the first Sunday, we went to one of their churches and kind of city near us and went to their service. And she kind of disappeared and we all had to find her. She was just outside, and these kids, there's a boys' home there. And this one teenage boy was trying to get her to go to this coffee house. And she luckily was smart enough to say no and didn't go. And then we went back there at the end of the week. He's like, hey, he's wanting me to go again. And I was like, listen, talk to John. If he's okay with it, I will go with you, whatever. It was only a couple blocks away. And he finally was like, if you're going with her, it's okay. And so a couple of us went. And so we went to this little coffee house and got some pastries and stuff. And then on the way back, she's like, hey, let's go over here to it was like a grocery store. And it was actually pretty wild. Like, you walk in and it's groceries, and then you go to the back and they have appliances. They have motorcycles in the window. It was like everything you could think about buying, like Walmart meets Home Depot meets motorcycle dealership. It was a cool little store. But I don't know why, and I may be wrong, but this little teenage kid, I see him get on his phone and call somebody. And he's calling somebody, and he's looking outside, and something just didn't feel right to me. My gut was like, something isn't right. And this whole time I was like, what is he trying to do? You know what I mean? His buddy's going to come steal her and sell her into the sex trade or something? So it was one of those, like, something just hit me wrong. And when I saw him on his phone and just looking outside, and it just hit me. And I took her and the other girl. I was like, let's go. We're going back right now. They're going to be looking for us. They were like, oh, I was like, we're going now. And so we went and we hustled, the couple blocks back to the church. And I just had this bad feeling like something bad was about to happen. So we just hauled ass back and nothing happened. Was I wrong or right? Who knows? I didn't say a word to any of them there, but
for future reference, those of you who are among the uninitiated, if somebody is on a phone and looking at you very intently, that's an engraved invitation to get the hell out of wherever you're at. Because that is what we refer to as a lookout. That's a secret tool to help us later.
Yeah, I felt wrong, and it was the only time I felt uneasy the whole time I was in the country. But I don't know, maybe it was nothing, but I never even said anything to anybody there. I was just like, they're going to think I'm crazy. I'm like, I don't care. I got those girls back safe, and but
I don't even want to give you you might have been crazy because, like I said, like let's step out of the area you were in. Let's say you're in Atlanta, Georgia. You're out with your wife or friends or whatever, and you see somebody on the phone staring at you, directly at you, very intently. Doesn't that give you a feeling of unease?
Mm-hmm.
Like, A, you're staring directly at me, which can be construed as being confrontational. B, you're on the phone with a party or multiple parties I don't know. And I don't think that's something to brush off. Like, plenty of people out there say that's paranoia, and I'm like, yeah, but I've been in life situations where paranoia is the only thing that kept me out of a pine box, so I'm okay being paranoid sometimes. But like you said, for a person who's never been in that environment, they would look at that and be like, what's the big deal? And it's like, well, there is no big deal until there is a big deal.
Until it was. So, yep.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I hate to say it that way, but it's like it's one of those things where, like you said, having your head on the swivel is staying out of trouble beats getting out of trouble every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
yeah, and but the thing is, though, is you wouldn't have to worry about anything if the like human trafficking wasn't
A thing.
and the largest industry in the world. Like it's the fastest. I mean, it's still growing. That's what's scary is the human trafficking, drug trade, stuff like that. Like that stuff, that's not going away. It's not shrinking no matter what they do. It's happening, and a 23-year-old female is a prime target. And that's the thing. And so luckily, I mean, it's good that you're there. And like you said, Tommy, could something have happened? Maybe not. But the idea that you had a gut feeling from this, like Phil said, like we have gut feelings for a reason. And most of us have had a gut feeling of, hey, I should take a left instead of a right or something going on. And I don't know. I mean, say what you believe or whatever, but maybe it's God talking to you or something saying, hey, let's get out of here. But yeah, I don't know. That's interesting because, and I mean, I'd be kind of curious to talk to her to find out her views now that she experienced that, because it sounds like, 23-year-old nurse, she really, maybe just got out of college. She really hasn't experienced much of life, traveled a lot, seen a lot of things. Just a typical young 20-year-old adult. And it'd be kind of curious to see, like, well, okay, her eyes, like, are your eyes open now to what the world is? I mean, they won't be fully open, but have you looked into this kind of stuff even more? And what do you think now? And what are your thoughts on this and stuff like that? But no, it's interesting to, it's interesting with what you said, because you definitely, you'll never know. It's going to be that question that you might ask yourself in 7 months from now or something like that. Like, hey, could something have ever happened? But I'd rather it not happen than you be on the show and saying, oh yeah, this happened. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I had some bullet points set up to kind of help guide through this conversation. And you just kind of like segued us right from one to the other without any prompt from me. So I guess we'll just start kind of tying everything together with a bow like this. Like, you've already talked a lot about your experience, about what you had to pack in, about what was on the ground, and what you had to provide for yourself. So, I mean, I guess, like, to me, where this is most applicable is in temporary grid down situations. Massive flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes, things that I refer to as punting us back into, like, the 6th century, where, like, today the skies are blue and I have air conditioning and electricity and clean water and everything's really cool, and then tomorrow all hell breaks loose and I'm living it's Little House on the Prairie days again. And I feel like that's like a good thing to put in our heads when we look at your experiences here, because it's like there's all these things you had to deal with and all these things you observed and all these things you had to prepare ahead of time for that are really applicable in those situations where we have to fend for ourselves and we don't have modern conveniences to fall back on. I mean, something as simple as having a water filter turned out to not be necessary for you, but for that family that had it, that was clean drinking water to them. So I mean, the lessons are there.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And, it's interesting to think about how those people, if that situation happened, their life isn't going to change a whole lot. And they're going to survive and fare way better than most people in our country would, because they kind of live that way. They live semi off the grid all the time. So it's kind of, I love our air conditioning and modern conveniences, but you're right. You lived through it with a hurricane, just having to not have everything you had, the normal stuff, just for several days or a week or two, was, I'm sure it was not fun, but, you were prepared and made it through fine without having to go anywhere. So.
Yeah. And something you just said that brought another Iraq story back into the forefront of my brain, but you mentioned that like in a serious situation, it doesn't really affect people down in the Dominican Republic because they already kind of live at that base technological level where if you wipe everything out they have, they could like Mormon stand up a barn in an afternoon and be right back where they were because that's just the technological level they're at. And it reminded me of the situation in Iraq where we had a local farmhouse. Turned out that the ISIS had kicked all the farmers out, and they were using it to house munitions. And the Air Force objected to that and sent a bomb through the top of the farmhouse, blew it to hell and back, took out all the munitions, solved the problem. The farmers weren't upset that we blew up their damn house because we got rid of the terrorists who had forced them out of their house. And they had a new mud hut standing up by the end of the day.
Wow.
And I don't even think we hurt their crops. I mean, that's just a wacky situation they were in where like if you drop a bomb on top of the average American's house, it's going to be 6 months before that problem gets solved because, you know, demolish everything, clear the slab, reestablish utilities, build the whole house up again, refurnish it. And when you live at that lower base technological level, it's like, oh, I have to get that piece of tin and those 2x4s and just put the roof up again.
Yep.
I think that even goes down into like, you know, like the less creature comforts you live with, the less impact to your life you experience when those things are torn away from you. I mean, it's why I refer to camping as bug out practice, because you live like a homeless person for a couple of days. You know, you learn how to not have stuff and how to live without it. And as a result, when Mother Nature throws a hissy fit, you're like, oh, it's August and it's hot and life sucks right now. But I've been in this situation in August, in the August heat, in a tent before, so I know how to make this work. But, so I know we talked like food and water. Out of curiosity, you mentioned that rice and beans was like a big part of their diet. I meant to ask earlier, was that like, are they subsistence farming down there, or is that stuff they're getting imported in, or where's their food coming from?
I think that a lot of that may be imported, the rice and maybe the beans. They grow, the area I was in, they grow sugarcane, they have bananas, plantains. In the north part of the country, they do tobacco, coffee.
All export, in other words.
Really good coffee. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And most of all that stuff. Yeah. And so they had fruit. We were literally walking outside and picking mangoes off the trees, and I've never had fruit that tasted like that. The bananas were just not unlike anything you get here, you know, but you just walk out and get that stuff. It was really cool. So yeah, most of that stuff they export to make money on. And then, yeah, I believe all the rice and beans and stuff most of that is imported. I didn't see anyone who had their own little gardens. They did have chickens running around. They had goats, sheep, a pig or two. I saw one turkey. That was kind of interesting. I was like, I hear a turkey, and there was this turkey running around. We did see some cows, you know, a few cows around. So they did have some of that, but I didn't see any like gardens where they were growing their own food in these areas. You'd see kids running around like chewing on sugar cane, which, you know, is probably great for your teeth and you're, you know, not very nutritious, but it's what they've got. Mm-hmm. So that was a big thing. And the sugar is, of course, a big export too. They had a railroad. And the plant was right there in that area. So they would just ship it there and then ship it out. There was a port in that area. It's called Bajarona, was the little area of the Dominican we were in. So.
And then what I know you mentioned that like y'all were there on a medical mission trip. Like what's their medical care like natively? Like, is it only available in the big cities and it's just an issue to go from the poor areas to the big cities to get care, or is it an issue of not being able to afford it, or is it just not even available? So
it is available. It's an issue with getting there and being able to afford it. They do have care in the big cities. So we actually, part of our mission is, you know, we saw people, we did some very, very basic labs, and then we gave out a lot of medications. We gave, you know, a whole lot of vitamins out and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Everybody got vitamins, and then whatever medications they needed, a lot of stuff for the worms and all that kind of stuff. We had a few people who really had other issues. Like, so we had one guy show up and he's got this big like mass on his neck, and they thought it was an abscess. It was draining, like they thought it was infection. Well, they took up money and got him sent to one of the cities around to get an ultrasound, and I don't think that cost very much. So, and they were like, well, if you come back, and we're going to be in a different place, but if you can find us, come back and we'll see what we can do. Well, end up being involving the parotid gland, one of the glands in your neck, and he was going to need to have it surgically removed. Well, this guy, the reason he was so upset, Sophie, but the reason he was so upset was that he worked at a hotel, and because of this thing on his neck, they had told him, you're scaring the guest away. Don't come back until it's gone. So he had lost his job because of this thing on his neck, and he was just begging for help. And they did a lot of research, and they found out they could send him to Santo Domingo, which they said a normal, like if there's no traffic, you could be there in two to 3 hours. But both the times we went took about 6 hours with traffic and the bad roads. So good long drive. So they figured out they could get him to a surgeon there for about and get it removed. Transportation and surgeon there for $1,000, which is a ton of money for them.
Peanuts for us, though. I mean, just to show like the chasm in the expectation.
So I thought it was kind of neat. The group I was with, they don't give away. We gave away medication in our care, but they don't give away money for advanced care like that. They would go to them and be like, what can you afford? We're willing to help. What can you afford? So like this guy, I think our group gave him $650, and he was going to spend the rest of his savings, life savings, to get this removed, because he was like, I'll spend everything I have because I need to work. And so that's what was going to happen is we gave him, we were setting up and going to pay the $650, and he would pay the rest to get him to better medical care. And we had one woman who couldn't walk, like probably had a pinched nerve in her back, the best of our assessment. And it was going to be about $100 to get her to an orthopedic doctor and get her an x-ray, if nothing else. And the doctor's like, she really needs an MRI, but it's going to be probably hard to get that. And so they do have medical care. It's just in the big cities and paying for it. It's just a lot of money. And like with her, we figured out, okay, they could afford $35 and we gave them $65 to get her to an orthopedic doctor. So, but I thought it was neat that they don't just give them the money, for this stuff. They're like, no, they need to be invested in their own care and have some skin in the game too.
It's probably also the issue of like giving the kid the sandwich and they get the snot kicked out of them to take the sandwich. I mean, I can imagine in a country as impoverished as what you're describing, handing somebody any reasonable sum of American greenbacks, you might as well hang a target on their back.
Yep.
I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I mean...
No, it's true. And I don't know how they've arranged paying. We may have paid on the back end, but they did help some people with stuff like that. But there is medical care, but it's, like you said, in the bigger cities. And when we were in even the city of Barcelona, it was a fairly decent-sized city, and there were hospitals and stuff like that. And apparently they do have, if you work for a company, you can get medical insurance. But none of these places, none of the people that work for the sugarcane farms have all this. So that's kind of the areas we were helping. But so it's definitely big, like you said, a big, caste system of what you are there.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine some of that becomes generational very quickly because, like, if you were born into a family they're sugarcane farmers, there are some built-in barriers to you working laterally into another career that could pay more. I mean, I think it's something that like a lot of Americans really overlook is the fact that, I understand that there are people that are not as don't have all the advantages somebody else does, but in this country, like there's enough times where a person has gone to night school, busted their butt, and done what they have to do to pull themselves up that I know it's possible. It just sucks and it's really hard sometimes. But in other countries, like if you were the son of a sugarcane farmer, you were going to farm sugarcane until you died. Yep. It's not even if I work 10 times as hard, you could work 10,000 times as hard. It's not going to change.
Yep, you're
And
correct.
I think that, and like I said, there's some people that might want to fight me on that. Like, we have those same problems here in the U.S., but to nowhere near the same degree as what we find outside of this country.
Yep, I fully agree. I met some guy at the gun range one time, and he was from Yugoslavia, and he was talking about that. He said he loved America, and you want to talk about somebody who's anti-socialism? He was a big Trump fan and all this, just because of wanting the freedoms. And he's like, he had some pretty good experiences. He lived through the war over there, and he said, if you're going to be a doctor, it's great. You get to be a doctor. He was a veterinarian. He goes, but if you are set to be a truck driver, you're going to be a truck driver, and you're never going to be a doctor. And he said the same thing over there. It was kind of, you're kind of set with what you are. And he said, here you can be whatever you want to be. And it was pretty cool. He came to the range. A buddy brought him there because he wanted to shoot an AR-15 because he'd only shot AKs.
Which, given the part of the world he was from, you could get your hands on an AK of any variety fairly quickly and easily.
And
stuff that we would do backflips to be able to get a hold
I
of
know.
here.
It was just kind of neat, though. This dude was tickled to death. He loved an AR. Thought it was amazing. So, but yeah, this guy's a veterinarian over here now, and but yeah, it's interesting when you talk to these people from other places, and they're very anti-socialism and some of these, things that the more progressive people in this country are trying to fight for right now. And they're like, whoa. Are y'all idiots? Have y'all not seen the way this worked everywhere else or didn't work?
I find that very interesting that people from Eastern Europe and Cuba are like really, really stereotypically anti-communist for some reason. It might have something to do with having lived under it before. That's the part that cracks me up whenever somebody says, well, no one's tried real communism yet. And I'm like, well, every other kind of communism that has been tried sucked really bad. So I don't know how much better real communism is going to be. But everybody that's lived under the not communism said it's bad. So I'd rather take their word of it over the 30-year-old with the PhD who's always lived in academia. Just putting that out there, Like, I know perilously little about farming. So if a friend of ours who happens to be a commercial farmer says, Phil, this is how you farm, I'm going to listen to him because he knows better than I do. It takes a really arrogant, egotistical moron to say, oh, no, you've lived it, but I know better.
Yep.
So I guess, like, if you had to wrap all this up with, like, the takeaway for the average person, like, based on your experience, what you saw down there, and just like, I almost feel like part of what you saw is like things we would call survival situations is everyday life to people in other parts of the world, and things that we never have to think about, like giving your kid a sandwich and letting him walk down the road without getting the snot kicked out of him. That it doesn't happen here typically, but in other parts of the world that's commonplace. Like, how do you try to snap a person out of the cultural blinders and say, hey, these situations exist over there, and you only are compartmentalizing, saying it can never happen here. But as we've all seen, there are situations where things do happen. I mean, we started this conversation off an hour and 20 minutes ago talking about Stop the Bleed classes. And yeah, it's a lot of it's centered around school shootings, but it's also the idea that, like, sometimes kids just do silly stuff. They put their arms through a plate glass window. Now you have a cut artery. Now you got to deal with the problem. And I look at it like natural disasters and hurricanes and blizzards and tornadoes and floods and yada, yada, yada. So, like, what could you tell a person that's never lived in those situations and you've seen people who've had to fight for their lives every day and say, hey, these are some things I saw down there that y'all probably ought to start thinking about up here, just in case, God forbid, you wind up in their situation.
And I think like we've always kind of preached around here is preparedness and being prepared, and I think it's mindset of not thinking this can never happen here, because we're only, like I said, one hurricane away, one blizzard away for Andrew or even me. We're even worse for blizzards. So Georgia doesn't handle snow very well. I've been without power for a week, or two, and that happens. But I think being prepared and thinking ahead for this stuff, whether it is water, food, or power, or whatever, and just it's all about mindset and doing what you can. I know everybody can't afford to have all the whiz bang tools, but just taking a little bit at a time and preparing what we can. But I think a lot of it's mindset and realizing this stuff can happen here, and no matter what the situation is. So, and being prepared, like you said, Phil, and like we do when we all go out, camping is a good dry run, and it's fun, right? So, but that's a good way to take your family out. And I would say anybody who has the opportunity to go do something like this, it's really nice to help people, and feel like you really were there and you get to share a little bit about what we do. And this wasn't cheap. The church raised all the money, and the little bit I think each individual had to pay. My dad paid for mine, so because he wanted me to go. But for 30 people to go, and all the money we spent for everything and giving everything we did away, and the medications we bought and supplies, they spent $55,000 for this week trip. It was the most expensive trip they had ever done, but to help 800 people. And like I said, I feel more blessed, and to see that, I really do want to take my kids out there to see that. And like you said, to experience that, and until you've seen it yourself, realize, hey, we've got it pretty good here, but you better be prepared because it could change in an instant.
Yeah. Andrew, you have anything to add? You're just sitting there nodding your head in the dark.
No, I just listening, and it was just really interesting hearing your experience and the takeaways from it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Andrew. I'm really disappointed you're not going to prepper camp, but
you'll get over it.
My wife did take your ticket, so she's going to be there this year. So
I sacrificed myself. There you go.
She'd have been there either way. It was just like, hey, if there's one not being used, and
yeah. No, hopefully all goes to plan, and I'll be there next year.
Good. Well, Arkansas at least.
And you can help me lean on about Arkansas, because that's a further drive for him than prepper camp is.
Yeah. That's true.
When he found out, he was like, "Ooh," and I was like, "Dude, you've already said you're not coming to prepper camp. You can't dip out on us. You can't dip out on us twice."
No, and I don't know if I even told you, Phil. We immediately got reserved our site, so we've got a site reserved for Arkansas. So whenever you put the dates out, so we're going.
If anybody out there is curious, that is a patron only exclusive, and the patrons should know about it. And if the patrons don't, then that's y'all's fault. Y'all should be asking me, "Hey, what's going on?" But for the general listeners, that's something we keep close to our chest for the patrons, for me, for Andrew, for other families, to just kind of get together and hang out. But prepper camp is 3 weeks away. If you haven't bought tickets and they're not shut off yet, then you should go and get them right now. And if you have already missed the boat, I highly recommend you look at going next year, because prepper camp is a great way for a prepper to dip their toe in the water and start meeting some people.
And we have a lot of fun and smoke cigars and drink a lot of whiskey.
Yeah, there's usually a lot of drinking and smoking, and we behave ourselves reasonably well. We haven't been kicked out yet.
No, yeah.
I'm going to have adult supervision this year with my wife, so, I'll be on better behavior than usual.
Wow.
Yeah. Let her go wild.
She makes me behave myself. But we'll go ahead and sew this one up for the listeners. I hope y'all got something out of this, and thank you, Tommy, for joining us. I mean,
thanks for having me.
When you told me where you were, I was like, that's an experience we need to unpack, because I always firmly believe that, there's lessons to be learned in every kind of situation that's out of the ordinary. And I've always said that, to me, war zones and the third world have more to teach us about survival than almost anything we'll experience in this country. Because, with the exception of maybe hurricanes, because hurricanes tend to, wipe out a whole, 10 zip codes at once. But, when there's a tornado and it wipes out a town, there's towns on either side of that are okay. If a town floods, you can get aid in from other towns. But when you're talking about a whole other country, and the entire country is at that poverty level and that technology level, there's nowhere to bring help from. You have to just learn to suck it up and live with what you got. But we'll roll this one out. Matter of Facts podcast heading out the door. Say goodnight, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Smart Alex, all of you.